Sorry, folks, bear with us while we remember how to do this.
We are recording.
Excellent. Good evening and welcome to the first Smitty Story Hour of 2022. Give folks a few more minutes to log in. Thank you for adding your names, class year, and location that you're joining us from. Let's see, during the presentation, if you have any questions, send them in through the chat. And when time allows, we'll ask those questions of our guest speaker. Of course, it's being recorded, thanks to Steve. And we'll broadcast this later so you can view it at your leisure. Or if you tune in late, you can always go back and look. Or if you missed a session, you could always go back and take a look. We have them all listed on our website. Alumni, well, it's paulsmith.edu, alumni, upcoming events. Not only do we have upcoming Smitty Story Hours listed there, as well as in-person events, should we be able to have them. To add your name and year, go to the chat feature and just type your name, your class year, and where you're joining us from. Let's see. Amy and Jay. All right. Dennis Flynn, excellent. Ron Perlick's back for more. Bethany, hi Bethany. Paul Pillis is in Arlington, Texas. Interesting, I thought he just lived up the road. Carl and Sarah in Pennsylvania. Oh, that Steve Frederick guy keeps coming back from West Jay-Z. He must like it here. Okay, Jim Voorhees, Bruce in Middlefield, Connecticut, the Nutmeg State. I was born in Milford. Bet you didn't know that. Home of Biff Lighters. You probably knew that though. All right. I think, well, we're right around 40 people in. Mike?
I think if you can give permission to Brett and to Mike to be able to speak and have their photos shown, we'll be ready to go.
I think they both can talk.
I certainly have that permission, Heather.
Yes, you do. And Brett was talking before, but I don't know, maybe he's, oh, Brett McLeod in Loon Lake. All right. Brett, are you still able to talk to us? Try again here. Aha. I gave Brett permission again.
Perfect. Thanks.
There we go. I don't know how I took it away, but all right, let's officially get this going. Welcome to the Smitty Story Hour. Thanks for joining us in our first Smitty Story Hour of 2022. We'll be presenting one a month during the academic year. For a list of upcoming Smitty Story Hours, visit our website, paulsmith.edu/alumni/upcoming events. On that events page, you'll not only see the Smitty Story Hours that are coming up, but you'll also have a link to past Story Hour recordings. We're recording tonight as well. And as with all of our Smitty Story Hours, this is brought to you by the Paul Smith College Alumni Association. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Mike Recklin.
Well, we decided to do this as a more informal session tonight. I'm happy to see all the alumni and folks out there. And I'm going to pass the ball to Steve because Steve's going to kind of act as monitor and keep us going in the direction he wants us to go.
Perfect. Mike, thank you. Thank you and welcome all these Smitties. This is actually going to be, I'm looking forward to this a lot. We got a couple of experts with us tonight, both Smitties, Dr. Mike Recklin, Dr. Brett McLeod. You know, both of those guys have a long pedigree of forestry. I'm fortunate. I grew up on a dairy farm. My family was involved in sugaring for 25 years. At one point, we were up to 18,000 taps, multiple sugar bushes, oil-fired evaporator. You know, we did it for a long time. And then at some point, my kids went away to college. There goes my labor. I still did 250 buckets the old-fashioned way, in addition to the 18,000 vacuum line taps, because I wanted to be able to better monitor the health of my maple trees. This was right after the ice storm of '98, and I was really very curious what, because you can see some of the damage clearly from the maple trees from the ice storm of '98. And after that event, we had to hire loggers to come in and reopen our roads and chip a lot of our broken trees, and that dropped us down to about 10,000 taps. They got to the point where we're all getting older in the family, and we decided just to lease it out. I'm right next door. My neighbors is Parker's Maple Syrup. Last year alone, 2 years ago, they produced over 56,000 gallons of maple syrup product, actual product. They're just, it's their business. It's huge. The technology that they use is amazing. So I thought, well, let's talk about technology. So the theme for tonight is what's old, what's new, what's sweet, and what is sold. And I think we're gonna have a lot of fun here tonight with our two guest speakers, with Mike and Brett. So Mike was kind enough to send us some photographs. We're gonna hit, Heather's in charge of the photos. And Mike, why don't you run us through some of what's old? Tell us about the heritage of making. In fact, I think everybody probably knows these two individuals in this photograph. Anybody want to raise a hand and guess who these are? Yeah, that's right. It's Paul Sorgel and our speaker, Mike Recklin himself here. So Mike, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little quick history of sugaring. You know, we're going to talk about Paul Smith's sugaring operation in general, but also more of a 30,000-foot view. What's going on in the industry? What is the latest cutting edge research? Mike and I spent a lot of time talking. I'm absolutely amazed at the research he's doing right now in West Virginia. And he's going to talk about what he's doing with black walnut syrup. I can't wait for you guys to hear about this. So, hey, Mike, why don't you kick it off here for us and tell us about the heritage of sugaring.
All right, I'll tell you, starting off with kind of my heritage in sugaring. Okay, I'm a graduate, 68, Paul Smith's pre-pro forestry, and in those days, the maple sugaring sugar bush at the college, I believe, and if I'm wrong, Paul, you correct me on this, I believe it was part of the minor forest products class that include sugaring, include charcoal, include a number of other minor forest products. And one of the things that has certainly changed in the industry is with the numbers that Steve just threw out, you certainly couldn't call maple syrup making a minor forest product these days. Traditionally, it was New England, it still is primarily a New England activity. Traditionally, it was a off-season farm activity. And if you had 1,000 taps, you were in the big time. Now, that being said, the first real commercial, large-scale maple syruping operation in the country was the Horseshoe Forestry operation out of Tupper Lake, New York. And this was back in the early 1900s, and they had 50,000 trees on tap. Now, if you worked in the Paul Smith sugar bush when you were a student up there, if you took minor forest products or later on the sugaring class, just raise your hand so we can see how many of you have had that on the ground or, hand wrought Paul Smith's experience with the sugar bush. It would be kind of interesting to know.
Well, they're piling in here, Mike. I'm looking at the numbers climbing up here. About 10 people so far.
Good. That's great. Well, then, one of the major advances in maple sugaring has certainly been the movement of when we did it. Okay. And I say we because back in 74, when I came back to join the faculty, I was on the forestry faculty back there, and we were up through 74 and beyond at Paul Smith's. We were collecting our syrup in buckets. All right. And I remember as a new faculty member, one of another Dean Rutherford, being Bill Rutherford's domain here in forestry, one of the first eye-opening experiences at Paul Smith's. Well, first time I realized that Paul Smith's really was a different place was when spring break came, because when spring break came, all the students went away, but the sap did not stop running. And Rutherford called the troops in, and all the forestry faculty collected sap, boiled sap, made syrup. Well, the students were on spring break. So spring break had a little different meaning to faculty at Paul Smith's. But movement to tubing to collect sap allowed us to move big time in the sugaring operations. And now Sweet Tree out of Vermont has got 500,000 taps on board. I mean, 50,000 taps, which they really did collect in buckets, was incredible. But 500,000 taps? Sweet Tree starts tapping on Thanksgiving Day to have all their trees tapped by the first sap run, the end of January. So that's new. And of course, the next new innovation coming down the line, not so much new anymore, but years ago, was hooking up vacuum to the sugaring operation so that we reduce the pressure outside of the tree. And of course, it's the partial pressure from inside to outside of the tree that allows the sap to run. So by reducing the pressure outside the tree, we were able to double sap production out of our trees.
Yeah, Mike, that's one of the
has all those innovations. Yeah,
people think it's a vacuum cleaner, like a suction hose out of a vacuum cleaner, sucking the sap out of the trees. So thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, it's really just a difference. It's more similar to the pressure in the tire of your car and the atmospheric pressure. If you put a hole in the tire of the car, the air pressure from inside the tire obviously comes on out, and you got to go find yourself someone to fix it. And it's the same thing with the tree. It's that different pressure differential. So anyhow, Paul Smith has both those innovations. Okay, we moved to collecting our sap with tubes. We've got a vacuum system out there. Brett can tell you more about the present condition out in the sugar bush. But more recently, not only have we been able to double or more sap production with a vacuum, we've also been able to increase the sugar content of the sap using reverse osmosis. And RO, as it's called in the industry, is simply a membrane that concentrates the sugars on one side of that membrane, semi-permeable, and allows the water, the pure water without any sugars, to pass through the membrane. So you can take sap that's 2% and get it up to 12% or higher before you ever start to boil with RO, reverse osmosis. And then finally, the last innovation I think I'd like to let you know about is more recently, Steve talked about some of us getting old. I don't know why he's doing that. I'm not going to bother myself. But as labor has become an issue and is an issue in the sugar industry right now, and checking all those lines for leaks. All right, if you've got a vacuum system, you want to apply the vacuum to the tree, not to the squirrel chew outside of the tree. And they've really a coming on thing here is using leak detectors that use cell phones or satellite communication to monitor vacuum levels on the end of your line. So if the vacuum level drops in one of your lines, you know to go out and find the leak, versus just simply walking around the woods every day, listening to the leak squeal in in the woods. So those are some of the new things going on in the sugaring industry.
Brett, anything you want to add in terms of some of the new innovations at our own sugar bush?
Sure. So, I think a lot of folks know that historically the sugar bush ran on cordwood, and then later on it ran with wood chips. And so currently it's set up for running on fuel oil, which is pretty handy when you have a 4-hour class and you get to the end of that class and you want to just hit a switch and be done with it. But we are actually looking at some options for pellets. The wood chips are tough because they freeze up with all the moisture and that sort of thing, but pellets get dried in a kiln beforehand. So that's sort of the next thing that we're looking at as a possibility for our evaporator. And then you heard Mike there mention the use of cell phones and really using GIS technology and GPS technology to locate leaks, and all of our students who work in the sugar bush keep those devices on them, and they have maps of all the main lines and lateral lines and that sort of thing. So we don't spend a lot of time running around the woods aimlessly looking for leaks. We're pretty quick in finding them these days. So those are sort of on the technology side, and I can say more a little later on about sort of the marketing side and where our products are going. But that's sort of what we're doing there. And of course, we have most of the sugar bush on vacuum. And as we expand it and have to work against different grades and that sort of thing, that vacuum becomes even more and more important.
Yeah, one of my favorite vacuum stories in my family's operation, we had a sugar bush located about 3 miles off the road, much too far to have electricity to be able to run the vacuum system. So there's nothing more ingenious than when old farmers get together to come up with a solution to a problem. My father bought an old Datsun B210 car from a junkyard that at least ran. We jacked it up in the woods. My job was to start it every morning, put it in 3rd gear, and he had a cone. He removed one of the rear tires. He had a cone off of it with a pulley that went up to running another pulley, which ran the vacuum pump that came out of an old dairy barn, which was used to run vacuum to milk the cows. So we calculated 3rd gear at an idle was just the amount of vacuum needed to run that entire sugar bush. So my job was to put gas in the car, start it up, put it in 3rd gear and let it run. And at the end of the night, shut it down. So again, nothing more ingenious than some old farmers getting together and solving a problem. Mike, why don't you tell us in terms of some of the sap products and how maple syrup is being used? Say, we talked about bourbon barrel, bourbon made in a barrel with health maple syrup, maple beer. You and I talked about, there's a market now for this distilled water that comes, when we used to run it through the RO, the byproduct is this distilled water. We just dumped it on the ground, and we thought, boy, it might be a market for that someday. So there's some very creative uses for maple syrup than the traditional use that we're all thinking of, which is pancakes and ice cream. So, Mike, can you tell us about some of the new uses for maple syrup and maple product?
Sure. And I like to start with telling folks that a gallon of maple syrup, you go and buy it at a store, will bring you'll pay $80 for it. Okay. If you buy it at the farmer's market, you pay $60 to $80 for it. If you take that same maple syrup and you turn it into maple cotton candy, that same gallon will give you $500. So the value added, the ability to take a product that we gather, make out of our forest and turn it into a secondary product, a value added product, is really where the money's at in the maple industry. And maple syrup is great. Maple beer is even better, or maple wine. Infused syrups are really hot on the market right now. You take an old bourbon barrel, you put some maple syrup in it, leave it set for a month, take it off, and you've got a really, really nice flavored maple bourbon flavor to your syrup. People are infusing maple syrup with everything from chili peppers to elderberries, okay, to get a different product, a different niche in the market. And in addition to spirits, there are lots of maple products, maple barbecue sauces, maple mustards, and our syrup makers. And in West Virginia, where I live, it's primarily small farm operations are doing very well by moving into these additional product areas. Now, that being said, what sells, if you're talking about sales of maple syrup, is culture, it's history, it's the lure of the sugar bush. And those of you who spend time out at the Paul Smith Sugar Bush know the magic of the boiling late at night. That's before we could turn it off, Brett, when the day was done. And a night might go till 1, 2 in the morning where we had to finish up the sap that was come into the tanks that day. That's really what's old in the maple business. It's what is appealing to people out of the maple business. It's just a neat process, and it's something that's harkens back to a simpler time in the Adirondacks and the Northeast, when the snow was starting to melt and you could get out a little bit and make your syrup. Every old dairy farmer like Steve there was in the game one way or the other.
You know, Mike, I'm really interested in the work you're doing in West Virginia. You're talking about some of the state and federal grants of how to get maybe some people in the coal industry, to think about getting into maple syrup. And you had a really neat mini evaporator on a trailer you're taking around to show people. Why don't you tell us what you're doing in West Virginia, some of your research, some of your grants that you've been receiving, and the work you've been doing.
I kind of landed in West Virginia, a Yankee well out of his home range on upstate New York, with knowledge of the production of maple syrup, with contacts in the northern tier of maple syrup producers. And down here, syrup production was part of the historic subsistence farming mode that people lived in West Virginia. Our state was settled by small farmers who moved up into the hills and hollers of West Virginia, and it was pretty much a subsistence agriculture model. As the mines opened up and the factories in the Ohio Valley opened up, these little communities in rural West Virginia pretty much were abandoned as people went to work for wage labor. And on many of the old farms, you still find that equipment from generations ago sitting in a barn somewhere. So right now, in this state, we've got people who are, first of all, I've never seen a place where people are as attached to the land as they are in Appalachia. They really know what hill or what holler they grew up on, and their family farmed in for generations. And that's really pretty cool. Well, as people have left the area and are coming back to those historic homesteads, they're trying to figure out ways to make a living. Likewise, our West Virginia is coal. Coal is king down here, but coal is on its way out. Thank goodness. Okay, we've got to move beyond, but that's an economic hardship in our region, and we see maple sap and syrup production not as the solution to that problem, but as one of a plethora of options that a farmer or a local person could get involved with. So we have coal miners who are making maple syrup, lots of them, okay, who own the land for generations, and maybe they're had a family history like yours, Steve, but they're getting back into it, and that's kind of a cool role that I'm helping to play down here, is the extending of knowledge of sap and syrup production, bringing together folks from up north with folks from down here, and trying to increase our sap and syrup production. Now, on the other hand, maple's not the only tree you can tap and make a sweet syrup. We can tap walnut, we can tap birch, we can tap sycamore, all right? And these all lead to they all have sap flow, they all lead to a very distinctive flavor to a syrup. And we're working with folks to extend that. I've got a guy, was at his place just yesterday, He's putting in 1,000 walnut taps. All right. That's pretty cool. And we've got 2 or 3 folks of that magnitude down here moving into walnut syrup production. Now, maple syrup is synonymous with Vermont in this country. Vermont made, MAID, which had very little maple syrup in it, made the maple syrup industry in Vermont. And it's an association. We will never in Appalachia compete with the Northeast in terms of syrup production, of maple syrup production. But walnut's a different story. All right. Vermont's got something like 3 walnut trees. We've got hundreds of thousands of walnut trees down here. And if we can start to monopolize and build our own industry based on that, and then we've got sycamore, and then we've got black birch. These all are good sap and syrup producing trees with all very unique markets. Right now, and just talk about the markets for a minute. Right now, the bulk price, not the retail or wholesale, but the bulk price of maple syrup is about $25 a gallon. The bulk price, folks, of walnut syrup last year was $350 a gallon. Well, who's paying that? What do they want it for? Walnut bourbon, where the sweetness of the bourbon comes from walnut. Walnut wines. There's a unique flavor to it, and the spirits industry will buy all the walnut syrup at this point that we can produce. And so we're starting to produce more and more of it. And then sycamore. Those of us in the forestry business know that there's not a lot of market for sycamore boards. They don't dry kiln very well. But if you can start tapping them and getting a syrup that's got, again, a very unique flavor to it, and market it, develop that market as we are for walnut, that's really good for sustainable forestry in our region. Okay, we're keeping the trees growing and on the land, and it's also good for our local economy. So that's the game I play down here. And Steve, as you say, we've been very successful in interesting federal agencies, USDA, amongst others, our Department of Agriculture, in supporting the growth of this industry in our region.
Mike, I'm dying to taste black walnut maple syrup. I can't even fathom what that must taste like. But what an incredible difference of price.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And people who've made maple syrup all their life, when they taste walnut, say it's better.
Bring some up. I'll taste it. I'll let you know.
I plan on doing that, Steve.
Awesome.
I plan on doing that.
Mike, we're going to switch over to Brett. And Brett, why don't you fill us in on some of the educational uses of the Paul Smith College Sugar Bush, commercial use. You have a school of maple. Where does our Paul Smith College syrup go to? Why don't you try to take it from there, Brett?
All right, sounds good, Steve. So obviously having the Sugar Bush is a pretty cool thing that sets Paul Smith apart from a lot of other schools. But of course, we need to justify the expense of having a Sugar Bush manager and all the equipment that goes along with it and all the rest. So we've been able to do that through a few things. We have a full class that's dedicated to maple sap and syrup production, but we also have a maple minor. So because we have both a culinary side of the house and the forestry side of the house, we combine those two for an 18 credit minor that any student in any of the programs can take. And about half of it is dedicated to sort of the forestry side, tending a sugar bush, the actual production of maple syrup. And then the other side deals mostly with value-added products, how you cook with maple and incorporate it both in sweet and savory applications. So that's a lot of fun. And one of the things that actually came out of that is we received a grant last year from the New York Workforce Development Institute to develop a school of maple. So while most things were shut down during COVID last spring, we were actually able to run a school of maple, which was a weekend training program that was populated by a lot of local farmers and landowners looking to get into the value-added maple business. So a lot of it was not just the techniques, but also the business side of things. And then we also practice sugaring at a variety of scales. So we have the Vic Sugar Bush, for example, that uses a small 2x6 evaporator, and then we have all the way up to our commercial operation on the White Pine Road that's about 3,000 taps. So it's really important that students see all those different scales. We're seeing more and more of our students actually get hired with full-time jobs with benefits as sugar bush managers, and they're really relying on a combination of both those traditional forestry skills in terms of TSI type work, stand improvement work, but also the mechanical skills and understanding the vacuum systems and marketing of the products. And that's probably one of the biggest changes that we've made recently is we're selling more and more of the Paul Smith syrup. We make about 1,000 gallons a year. More and more of that is being sold roadside. So we now have a stand that folks can purchase maple syrup from right at the sugar bush, right by the entrance. And that's where we're doing better than half of our business now. And then the rest of the syrup either ends up in the bookstore on campus, or in Saranac Lake is a huge consumer of it, particularly the Hotel Saranac. So it's used both in the restaurants and also sold in the gift shops as well. And then we sell our late season dark syrup gets sold as an additive to distillers who use it as a flavoring for spirits as well. So all kinds of neat applications, but we have a lot of fun with it, and I think the students get a lot out of the class. It's a lot of hard work. So they're required to have snowshoes and tromp through the snow and all the rest, tapping and finding leaks, and ultimately end up spending quite a bit of time in the bottling shed as well, making that final product ready for consumers.
Brett, thank you. When you were talking, I wanted to ask both Mike and Brett about some of the threats to the sugaring industry with some of the invasive species. They're here. Brett, Mike, anything you want to talk about in terms of some of the threats, global warming? What are we looking at for, something that's so important to the economy of the maple industry? Talk a little bit about what some of the threats that we're facing and what do we do about it?
Well, I know we are concerned down here with the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive species, comes in and defoliates our maples. And there's also the Asian longhorn beetle. Those are two that we monitor and are concerned about. They're not imminently a problem down here, and they may not be a problem up in the Northeast much at all, depending on what their requirements are for maybe too cold up there for them. The global warming issue is of course one that nobody's. If you can tell me that, Steve, well, you ought to be president. Okay, what's gonna happen with this warming? It certainly is happening, and what we see mostly is our season moving up, so that we're tapping. I mean, people in Vermont now are starting to tap in mid-January. That's almost unheard of. Only a few years ago, I remember the Vic was not tapping till March. So that's what we're seeing moving up there. The other thing we're seeing, I think, is and this is a hypothesis. I'd love to get some funding and do some research on it. Brett, maybe we should do that. But I think that as we move the season up, we're seeing less sweet sap than we had when the season was placed later in the year. And the reason for that, in my humble opinion, is that the only reason there's sweetness in that sap is the trees are getting ready to break bud and leaf out, and they need the energy of that stored sugars. As you move further and further into the season, actually the timing of leaf out hasn't changed that much, because that's set pretty much by day length. But the season earlier in the season, we're seeing there's much less sweetness in the sap than there is later. So that's an issue. Now, if you got an RO, you can sweeten it up, but still it takes you more sap to make that gallon of syrup than if the sap was sweeter early on. Brett, do you want to take that with somewhere else?
Sure. So I think you hit on a bunch of good points there, Mike. I think for us, it's that, with climate change, it's created more uncertainty in terms of what the season actually looks like. And we have these wild temperature swings that make it really tough. We had almost 2 weeks last year during the height of sugaring season where it didn't get below freezing, and then we've had another string where it didn't get above freezing, and we really need that swing back and forth, above freezing during the day and below freezing at night, for the trees to produce. And so that's our real challenge. It's shifted things like when we boil. We had film crews lined up and thought for sure that in late March we would be boiling, and we had to call those off. So it's made it a little tougher to predict things. And as far as our production goes, last year was about our worst year in 10 years in terms of production, which was reflected at the farm stands with higher prices for maple syrup last year and a lot of sold out signs. If anyone went to the Paul Smith's bookstore recently, you'll see there's a bunch of bare shelves there. We normally try to produce enough to get us to the next year, but we ran out before Christmas this year. So it's certainly of concern. We've been fortunate that we don't have the Asian longhorn beetle up here, but as they say, these things are just a matter of time. And probably the spotter lanternfly is eventually going to be the greater threat here. So no shortage of challenges, and it'll be interesting to see how we respond to that. Tapping birch trees is typically, the birch season is right after the sugar maple season. So we're looking at that, and the birch trees are a little more forgiving in terms of their sap production and temperature swings and that sort of thing. So that may be a sort of the alternative to us. On the downside, birch syrup requires about 100 gallons to 1, but on the plus side, you're looking at about $500 a gallon.
You just as on a side note, my friend Jack Burke, Timmy Burke, is a biathlete of some acclaim. He claims that the Scandinavians can ski so quick because they drink so much birch sap.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Mike and Brett, in terms of tapping birch trees and black walnut, are you using the same kind of equipment, the same size tap, the same, what can you tell us just a little bit about how the process is different?
I've got a project down here. We're trying to design a tap specifically for walnut, because walnut has a different density. It's a semi-ring porous tree versus a diffuse porous tree. The bark is much thicker, and all the taps on the market right now are obviously designed for maple. So that's one thing I'm working on. Aside from that, the process is pretty much the same. You gather the sap and you boil it down.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think for the
Go ahead, Brett.
So I was just going to say, for the birch trees, one of the things we often try to do is when we're laying out lines in the bush is make sure that we can reach both the birch trees and the sugar maples and the red maples all with the same taps and lines, so we can basically switch over from sugar maple to birch. Usually it's in April that we're making that switch.
Excellent. I'm looking at the clock. I got pretty close to 7:40. I'd like to be able to open the floor up. Heather, I know usually monitors some of the questions coming in. So if you have a question that you wanted to ask Mike or Brett, go ahead and type it right into the chat room. Heather, are you able to read some of the questions we've got so far?
Sure. I have a question from Ron Perlick, who actually makes the trip to Sugarbush Breakfast every year on motorcycle. But we can talk to him about that soon. His question is, the vacuum tubes, can the collection point be higher in elevation than the tapped trees?
No, sap flows downhill, and there are ways to, and Steve, you would know more about this. There's ways to put in lifters using vacuum that'll lift the sap up, but then it still is a downhill flow process. So everything's got to flow downhill.
Yeah, I watched my neighbors just around the corner, Parker's. They actually couple points lift up over the road, which is pretty impressive, but that's rare. I've ever seen a lot of folks now are actually looking for culverts and try to run main lines under culverts than to lift over the road. But yeah, that's a great question. Heather, was there another question in the queue?
I'm not seeing another one. Oh, wait, something just popped up. Has the college ever thought of holding a sugaring roundtable or other event for New Englanders and New Yorkers that run sugar houses? That question came from Chris Ruther, who is also an alumni board member and lives in Vermont, by the way.
You know, we haven't actually hosted an event. We participated at plenty, but I think we'd certainly be open to that in the future.
You guys did do
it's a natural fit.
Birch program.
Yeah, we did the about I guess it would have been 8 years ago, maybe. We did the International Birch Symposium, which we hosted at the Paul Smith's Vic, and we had folks come from as far away as Siberia to participate in there, and we had a great tasting contest and all the rest. And again, that was focused on birch syrups, but we haven't done any of the maple conferences at Paul Smith's, at least in recent years.
Let's see. Where can someone buy birch syrup? Also, can an individual buy the dark PSC syrup? And last, where can someone get the wine you talked about? And that was from Alexandra Phillips, who I believe is from the class of '85 EET. She says, hi, Mike.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Yeah. Hi, Andrea. Well, where do we start? Where do you buy Paul Smith's dark syrup, Brett?
All right, so that one, it's interesting because usually the bookstore does not order that from us. Most of it is either light or medium, and you have to get it directly from the Sugar Bush, or you can get it at Sugar Bush Breakfast, but it's typically comes from the end of the season. And if it's a long end of the season, there's more produced. And if it's a short, abrupt end of the season, there's less of the dark produced.
Maple wine. I think I know where to buy it down here in West Virginia, some of the producers, but I wouldn't know nationally. I think I'd probably just Google it and see what comes up. There are lots of people doing it.
And then what was the last question there?
Well, what about birch syrup or the black walnut syrup?
Black walnut, I can get you, Andrea. Birch, you'd have to talk to Brett about.
We sold a little bit of the birch syrup in the gift shop at the Paul Smith's Vic in the past, but it was we did it as an experiment one year, and at 100 gallons to one, no matter how much we sold it for, it still didn't feel like enough.
And actually, you can buy walnut and birch syrup from Mike Farrell's operation, New Leaf Maple. So if you Google that, New Leaf Maple, he'll have all of that, the alternative syrups for sale.
Yeah, and he has actually, there's in Lake Placid, there's a farm stand that Mike has set up that has all the alternative maple and maple related products that you can get. There's probably 25 or 30 different products in the farm stand.
Heather, I don't know if you saw this question, but it's really intriguing me. I want to ask Mike. The question is from Peter Frank. Does the value of walnut syrup exceed the value of walnut lumber?
Oh, Peter, we have a graduate student at WVU trying to answer that question as her master's project. So that's a really good question. And the answer that I tell people is, if you got a nice walnut veneer log, you'd be absolutely crazy to drill a hole in it. All right. If you've got a gnarly, malformed, branchy walnut. That's not going to give you that nice veneer log. And if you can tap it for 20 years as it's growing before it moves into, a good saw timber class, why not take that intermediate income from that tree?
Excellent answer, Mike. Have you got some more questions coming in?
Let's see. What is the ratio of walnut sap to syrup?
Same as maple. But down here, it's averages around 1.5 now to 1.8. You've got a sweeter sap up north, Brett. You're in the 2s most of the time, correct?
Yeah, 2 to 2.5.
Yeah, that's interesting. We don't see that in West Virginia.
Does tapping small diameter trees hurt the tree in regard to future growth?
The answer to that is Proctor Research Center in Vermont has done work, and they have not found any reduction of growth due to tapping. Now, the guideline, the issue is not that you're taking too much sap out of the tree to reduce the growth. The issue is around each tap hole, you're getting a dead area of wood. And even that dead area of wood is not particularly damaging to the tree, which is used to having lots of dead wood, heartwood and broken branches and things like that. But it really gets to the point that smaller diameter trees don't have enough surface area on their circumference to sustainably support tapping over the long run. Now, that being said, the other issue with small trees, which we think about a lot down here, is they tend to be understory trees, not have a lot of branches, not supporting a lot of leaves, not making a lot of sugars, and thusly your sap from those trees tends to be much lower in sugar content.
Okay.
10 inch or less. The rule of thumb is don't try to tap a tree 10 inches in diameter or less.
Okay. Carl says, I assume the sugar bush has grown since the 80s. How many more taps are there now?
So we're right about 3,000 taps right now. And there have been, it's a fairly mature sugar bush, at least the area immediately adjacent to the sugar house. And some of those really large sugar maples have come down in recent storms. But we have expanded further up the White Pine Road. And because of the topography, we actually have to use a tank in the back of a dump truck to move the sap from the upper sugar bush down the road, because it goes up over a ridge and we'd have to use vacuum and all the rest. So it was actually easier just to let it be on gravity and then move the sap down to the sugar house. So about 3,000 taps.
Okay. Bill Studiford, class of 96 and 2000, says, hi, Mike.
Bill,
And,
great.
his question is part of the reason for the season moving up to cover a wider span of time so as to be sure to catch any available weather, what with the wider swings in weather?
Yeah, what we're really seeing is that, the sap will run as long as you have freezing nights and warm days. And as long as you don't have an extended period, like Brett said, you suffered last year, extended period of warm weather in which the trees start their healing process. So what we're finding down here is that the season is ending sooner because we no longer have the freezing nights. All right. Without the freezing nights, you don't have the recharge and the sap flow.
Okay. And with the PSCRO system, how many gallons of sap to a gallon of syrup?
So
Brett,
yeah, so what they're doing is they're taking it from about 2 or 2.5% to typically 10% sugar concentration, and then boiling it down. So you're basically doing a quarter as much boiling as you would normally have to do. So it's pretty quick when we get it going, and we have it set up on so it's automated now for the draw off. So it's actually, when we're really running, there's syrup coming out of the end of it continually, and we put it into kegs, and then those kegs are either sold as wholesale kegs, or it moves to our bottling facility where it's put into the smaller jugs that we sell directly.
The old rule is the rule of 86. 86 divided by the sugar content of the sap will give you how many gallons of sap it takes to make a gallon of syrup. So if you take 86 and you divide it by 2, you get 43 gallons to make a gallon of syrup. If you take 86 and you divide it by 10, it's 8.6 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup.
Okay, and Andrew Murphy says, do you ever need volunteers? If so, who do we talk to? Well, it depends on what you want to volunteer for. I need volunteers for Sugar Bush breakfast, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, so when we're actually when the bush is actually running and we're trying to boil and also repair lines and all the rest, anyone who dares to drive through the gate is gonna be put to work. Jim Brandis is our Sugar Bush manager, and he's available over email, jbrandis@paulsmith.edu. He has folks come out all the time throughout the sugaring season that just want to help out or learn a little bit. But he spends a lot of time out there and is more than happy to show people the ropes.
I believe the Vic Sugar Bush, which is Paul Smith's second small scale operation, also works primarily with volunteers, both boiling and collecting.
They do, and they're largely on buckets, and so with the buckets, there's a lot more labor than the tubing system, of course.
So whoever asked that question, bring your snowshoes.
Brad, if I can just hop in on a quick comment about buckets. Still back when we did around 18,000 taps on vacuum, I still did 250 buckets, mostly right around my house. And right after the ice storm of 98, and if you took a nice big old granddaddy maple tree where you could hang 3 buckets on it, when you go to dump the bucket, you grab that first bucket, it was right up to the top with beautiful, clear, cold, beautiful sap. You dump that into your gathering tank, and then you put it back on the spout, and you go around the other side, and the bucket was empty. I mean, nothing. And you look up and you can start to see, where some of the woodpeckers are getting into that. You got some dead limbs. And then you go around to the third bucket, and it'd be like a quarter full of this most foul smelling yellow liquid. It's like somebody urinated in the bucket. It was horrible. And you would dump that on the ground. And, I found it just very, very interesting to be able to monitor the health of a tree by doing this extra work with gathering by hand. When you start running taps through the woods, you tap everything that's a maple, and it all goes into the lines. It's a little bit harder to monitor the health of your sugar bush. Any thoughts on that, Mike or Brett?
Yeah, I can say that, in the days when people gathered with buckets, or when I gathered with buckets, we knew the individual trees, which ones were high producers, which ones were low producers, which ones were sweet, which ones weren't. Trees have personalities just like people. Okay. I like to say some are sweet and some just aren't. That's the way people are. And maple trees are the same way. So we have lost that when you've moved to tubing. And I think that is a loss in my opinion. Yeah.
So this is my favorite question of the night. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. I was just going to say, in terms of our forestry operations, it makes it much more difficult with all the tubing. And so the tubing, a lot of it we're dropping every 6, 8, 10 years, depending on where it is. And when we do that, we try to time that with any major removals of trees or pruning or whatever, because once those lines are up, it's much harder to do any of that work. So there are still some benefits to the old bucket system.
Not to mention,
mu-
it just looks beautiful. So Heather,
Yeah,
you
it
wanna,
does.
you wanna wrap this up? Any other last questions, Heather? I think I saw one.
This is my favorite question of the night.
There you go.
My very favorite question of the night. My friend John Fox wants to know, when is the Sugar Bush breakfast this year? And as you all know, I'm all about the next party. So our Sugar Bush breakfast will be held on April 23rd. And that's COVID willing. You know, who knows what's going to happen next. But that's when it's scheduled, April 23rd from 9 to 11 out at the Paul Smith Sugar Bush. Invitations will go out sometime in March. And if we have to change plans due to this pandemic, the word will get out there. The image you're seeing on your screen right now is actually the image from 2020 that we actually canceled that event. So I really like this because it was the new Sugar Bush sign and it had our new horses in it. And it was just, yeah. Anyway, we hope to see you all there. If you haven't been to Sugar Bush breakfast in recent years, we feed, you know, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people out there in 2 hours time. It's a pretty amazing event. I wish Paul Sorgel was here to talk with you about that, Mike, and how that event all came to be. So it's really a fun time.
It is. And Paul and I started that when we were both division head, and it's really heartwarming to me to see how it's grown, Heather, and how the alumni have responded to that. It certainly is one of the events of Paul Smith College alumni. That's so much fun.
It absolutely is. It puts everything we do together in a 2-hour span in the middle of the woods. It's perfect. All
Well, at
right,
this point,
folks.
Heather, I wanted to do a quick thank you to Mike and to Brett. You know, I'd said starting at Paul Smith just a little over 2 years ago. I've gotten to know them both very, very well. I absolutely enjoy every one of my conversations. They're my partners in crime, and I just love the work that both of you fellows do, and thank you for taking the evening and joining us tonight. So Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you to let you wrap it all up.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the first Smitty Story Hour of 2022. Our next Smitty Story Hour is coming to you on February 3rd. And this one I'm kind of excited about. We have Bob Seinstein coming to talk to us about Winter Carnival. And
You weren't excited about this one, Heather?
Oh, just, you know, this one's really sweet.
Steve, Mike, and Brett? I mean, come on.
Well, Brett was a surprise guest. I didn't know Brett was going to be able to make it. But I'm really glad he did. I know Paul Pillis was on here. Let me see if he's still here. And I'm going to give him permission to talk. Paul, if you want to chime in at any time, you're welcome to do so. Oh, Paul Finewood's here. Hi, Paul. Sorry, I just looked at the list of all these people that logged in. Pam Nobles, hello again. We talked earlier today.
Heather, I am here. Can you hear me?
I certainly can, Paul, and so can the rest of the world.
Good, good. And what was your question about Winter Carnival or Seidenstein?
Oh, it wasn't a question. Smitty Story Hour, the next one, February 3rd. Bob Seinstein is going to do our Smitty Story Hour on Winter Carnival.
He's part of the aura of what makes Winter Carnival special.
Absolutely.
He's willing to be as crazy as the carnival itself is.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I actually, I was at a Winter Carnival rehearsal of sorts before Smitty's Story Hour started tonight. So I'll just say the lawn chair ladies are ready. We're very ready. We miss our Winter Carnival shenanigans. If anybody else has another question, we're happy to take them. Otherwise, it's just about 8 o'clock.
And this was recorded, and Heather will have it up on our website for anybody who wants to go back and review it or share it with some other Smitties who weren't able to join us tonight. just go back to paulsmiths.edu/alumni and you'll be able to get a copy of tonight's recording.
Absolutely. And all the other recordings, there's only one missing. All the other recordings are there except for the one from April 22nd. Joe Conto and Jamie Brodowski, that recording was lost. We had some issues with saving that and it's just gone forever. So I guess we'll have to do a redo. Checking back, make sure we got all the questions answered. We sure did. Thanks, Dennis. We look forward to seeing you and all your students in April. So I'm sure I'll see you before then. Thank you, Pat O'Connor, for joining us. Marty, thank you. Good night, Amy and Jay. See you soon, Ron Pierce.
Well, Brett and Mike, it sure sounds like you guys were a hit. So thank you again for everything.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for doing this for us. We lost Mike. He's gone. All right, folks are signing out.
And Heather, I'm going to stop recording at this point.